Hi there. Today we are talking about how to become a more efficient reseller. So first I just want to say being an efficient reseller is really important. And here's a big reason why. Reselling is a very, very labor-intensive industry. Let's compare it to traditional clothing retailers, for example. A traditional clothing retailer will have a single product that they will similarly spend resources styling, photographing, listing, and marketing, but they will be able to purchase hundreds, if not thousands, of that single product, which gives them the potential to have a really high return on that single SKU, on that single product. Whereas resellers typically, for each and every listing, only have a single quantity. And so we as resellers are spending time sourcing, processing, photographing, listing, and we have to spend that enormous amount of labor and effort and time into every single quantity listing. And so generally the biggest bottleneck for resellers quickly becomes labor. And when you're a solo reseller, labor means the amount of time you, your only employee, has to spend within your reselling business. Whether you were able to spend 100 hours a week, or you're like me where you only have a couple hours a day at most to spend within your reselling business, eventually you will hit full capacity where you no longer have any more time to devote to processing more inventory. So if you want to make more money, you essentially have two options. You can either source more profitable inventory or you can improve your systems to maximize efficiency. I talked all about my upcoming business model change in my most recent podcast episode, which I will link up on the screen. And I also have that available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, which is linked down below. And in that business model, I am planning on sourcing more profitable inventory in order to fully leverage my time. But it's also a really big goal of mine to make my systems as efficient as possible. And so I wanted to make a video all about how I'm making my own business model more efficient, the concepts and frameworks I'm using to think about that on a daily basis, and then some tangible, actionable tips that I'm using to hopefully make my business more efficient and ones that you can use to make yours more efficient too. Okay, so let's start with the frameworks and concepts. I went to undergraduate business school at NYU, which when I mentioned that, people are like, did you really need to do that to resell? No, I didn't. However, I did take a lot of courses in college that I use on a daily basis within my reselling business. And one of the courses that I constantly use concepts from is operations management, where I essentially learned to be the COO or the chief operating officer of my reselling business. So I wanted to share some concepts with you from that to help maximize efficiency. And it's also going to provide a blueprint for the audit that I'm going to do on my own business in this video, and then one that you can do within yours. Okay, so within the analysis of an operation, the first concept I want to go over is process. A process is that which converts inputs to outputs. Simple as that. The next concept I want to go over is resources. Resources are the things you need to carry out a process. Okay, so next is systems. A system is a set of processes. And then lastly, a systems flowchart. So this is something that we're going to use, and it is a symbolic representation of your processes and how they interconnect with each other. Okay, so for reselling, we could create systems flowcharts for sourcing, for processing inventory, for listing inventory, for shipping our inventory, for returns, for bookkeeping, etc. But today I want to focus on a systems flowchart for processing inventory and audit that within my own business. So this is basically what I do with inventory as soon as it gets into the office and how I prepare it to be listed. Okay, so within my systems flowchart, each square represents a process. So within my reselling business, the systems flowchart for processing inventory goes as follows. First, I hang up my inventory. Then I steam my inventory. Next, we've got photographing, and then measuring, and then lastly, inventorying. Writing down my system's flow chart was actually an interesting exercise for me because it made me take a step back, just at this step, hit pause and say, are there any processes here that I can actually just get rid of entirely? Do I really need all of these processes? There are resellers, for instance, that never hang up inventory, resellers that do flat lace, for example. There are plenty of resellers who never steam inventory. I know a bunch personally. There are resellers who don't measure. I was one of them for years. And there are resellers who don't have an inventory process, which actually would not recommend. Most professional resellers do have some sort of inventory processes. So I wouldn't recommend cutting that step, but it is true that there are some resellers who don't. So when I'm asking myself, okay, are there any here that I want to remove? The answer for me right now is no. However, as I transition into my new business model and source much more selectively at places like Crossroads, I can actually think of a way I could cut out some of these processes. So if you'll just indulge me for a second, my idea is to take a garment bag into Crossroads with hangers. And so when I'm checking out, instead of putting it into a bag, I just hang up my new inventory in my garment bag on my hangers that I already use within my office. That way I can cut out the step of hanging up inventory, and I can cut out the step potentially of steaming, because a lot of times when I purchase things from Crossroads, it's already nicely steamed or it's not very wrinkled. And so I can literally just bring it into the office, take it out of the garment bag, it's already hung up, put it on the rack, and start photographing. And that could potentially make my entire systems way more efficient and time effective. So just an idea that I came up with while doing this exercise, but I thought a good example of something that can really spur thought and some creativity in terms of maximizing efficiency within my business, but maybe could do the same for yours. Okay, so after we have established our system's flow chart, the next thing we want to do is assess our cycle times. A cycle time is the average time necessary to carry out a process. So for our purposes within reselling, the way to assess your cycle time within your process is to time yourself. Time how long it takes, for example, to steam 10 items of inventory. So if it takes 15 minutes to steam 10 items, take 15 divided by 10, and your cycle time for that process is 1.5 minutes. And then we're going to assess your flow time. So we got cycle time and flow time. Cycle time is how long it takes to do the process. Flow time, within this example, is how long it takes a single piece of inventory to go through the entire process. So you'll take all of your cycle times within a system, all the cycle times for each process, add them up, and that will be your flow time. So I did this. I timed how long it took me to hang inventory up, steam it, photograph it, measure it, and inventory it. Actually, I do combine my measuring and inventorying, which we'll talk about more in a second. So it took me, in the first one, Matt laughed at when I told him, it took me 8 minutes to hang up 14 pieces of inventory, so 0.6 minutes. I just timed myself, I didn't judge myself, I timed myself, and I think I got distracted, came across some flaws, etc. So it actually took me a fair amount of time to hang things up. But to steam things, it took me about 15 minutes to do 7 pieces of inventory, so 2.1 minutes there. It took me 41 minutes for 16 pieces of inventory when it came to photographing, so that's 2.5 minutes there. And then for measuring and inventorying, like I said, I combined those two things right now. It took me 33 minutes to do 15 pieces of inventory, so 2.2 minutes. So that means my flow time for system of processing inventory, which again does not include the time it takes to source the inventory, doesn't include the time it takes to list it or to ship it, but just for processing it, it is 7.4 minutes. So now is when you want to, and I want to, take a step back and ask myself, how can I shorten my cycle times? Because this is how we are going to really maximize efficiency. For my business, reselling business, I really took some time to think about this, and I wanted to focus on 2 key things that I think I can do that will really move the needle. And so the first is for photographing. I have noticed that I take a lot of extraneous photos. So I will get caught up in the details of this, that, and whatever. And instead, I'm really going to limit myself to 5 photos per item. I'm going to take a full photo of the front, of the back. I'm going to allow myself 1 photo of some detail. I'm going to take a photo of the brand tag. I think that's important. But just really limiting the amount of photos I am able to take, I think should improve my photographing cycle time substantially. And then when it comes to measuring and inventorying, like I said, I am currently, for each and every inventory piece, measuring it and then inventorying it at the same time. So I'm using the same table for both. I'm kind of having to shuffle around my folding mat, which I use, and my measuring tape, and I have a measuring tape on my table, and then I have a tailor's tape as well. And shuffling back and forth between those 2 pieces of equipment, I think is very inefficient. So I'm actually going to change my office space. I'm going to put 2 tables side by side. One will be dedicated to measuring, one will be dedicated to inventorying, and I'm going to take advantage of the assembly line effect, which, for those of y'all who are unfamiliar with assembly lines, it was created or popularized, I'm not sure, by Henry Ford. Previously, vehicles were put together by, a few people, but they would be put together all at once. So a few engineers would create the entire car step by step by step. However, Henry Ford came along, he created his assembly line, so then each person was doing the same thing over and over. So one person, for instance, was putting the tires on the car, and one person was putting the engine in. I don't know how to make a car, but you understand what I'm saying. People were doing the same thing over and over and over. It became way more efficient. They were able to produce way more vehicles in a short amount of time, and that kind of assembly line was adopted by almost all manufacturing processes today. So I want to leverage that concept into my measuring and inventorying so that I'm doing the same movements over and over and over within each process, which I think will make it way more efficient, and hopefully I'll be able to shorten my cycle times and improve efficiency. The major con when it comes to assembly lines is that it can become really monotonous. That's why if you are processing a high volume of inventory, you can take advantage of this concept by, say you're processing like 300 pieces of inventory per week. What you could do potentially is commit in a single day to photographing 300 pieces of inventory. In theory, you would be taking advantage of the assembly line concept because you'd be doing that over and over and over and over again. However, it's really monotonous, and so it can become boring. And also, I do really think there are diminishing returns in terms of the amount of efficiency over time when you're doing the same task over and over and over, because you're just going to get bored, you're going to get tired, and you're going to become less efficient, on your 200th item photographed versus your 20th. So we are humans after all. We are not robots. So something to keep in mind when applying these concepts, but I do think it is actually really good and important to break down your processes and do batch work and take advantage of that assembly line concept. So you're not picking up a piece of inventory, steaming it, photographing it, measuring it, inventorying it, and then starting on the next one. You're doing each one of these processes in batch. Okay, so just to recap, in order to audit your operations, in order to maximize efficiency, this is what you're going to want to do. You want to break down your systems into a systems flow chart. You're going to assess the cycle times of each process within your systems. You're going to ask yourself, is each one of these processes actually necessary? And if it is necessary, what changes could I make in order to reduce my cycle times and maximize efficiency? We can actually also apply this framework in order to determine how much money you are making per hour. In order to do this, you need to time yourself doing every single step of reselling. And then you would sum up all of your cycle times of reselling into an overall flow time of reselling. Then you would take your average profit per item within your reselling business, divide it by your flow time of reselling, and multiply that by 60, and that is how much you make per hour. So for instance, say you time yourself going to the thrift store, You figure out your flow time for that. You time yourself doing every single step, shipping, photographing, listing, etc. You get your flow time for reselling. Say your flow time, which means how long it takes a single piece of inventory to go through all of your processes. Say it's 20 minutes. And then say your average profit per item is $15. You would take 15 divided by 20 and then times that by 60, and that would bring you to $45 per hour. Not bad. I think this is really important to know and to keep in mind as you move through your reselling business, because if you're a solo reseller, reselling is a job. You are trading your time for money. It's not a passive investment that you can scale. It is a job. And because of that, it's really important to treat it as such. It's really important to improve your systems and not only maximize efficiency by improving your systems, but also maximize efficiency by getting rid of any wasted time. There are so many things within reselling that you can waste your time on. Sourcing bad inventory, spending too much time fixing or mending flaws that aren't going to provide a return on that time invested, scrolling on Instagram, doing unnecessary admin work, sharing on Poshmark is a huge waste of time, and I've talked about that on this channel, and there are so many more that you can come up with. And so another efficiency tip, and something that I try to do, is to actually clock in and clock out when you are working on reselling. And there are different apps that you can use to do this. And then after you've actually clocked in, set timers. And commit each timer to a process or to a task. So for instance, if I need to photograph 10 items, I'll take the cycle time of how long it takes to photograph an item, for me 2.5 minutes, and I will commit 25 minutes to photograph those 10 items. I'll set a timer and I will just be hyper-focused on that task. Sometimes I go over that 25 minutes and that's perfectly okay, but what it really does is helps to hold me accountable, and it helps me realize that time, which is ticking, really is money, and I really need to use it as efficiently as possible. Okay, the last thing I wanted to actually mention when it comes to maximizing efficiency is that the more you niche down, the more efficient your systems will be. Your sourcing will be simplified, your processes will be streamlined, your listings will be much more formulaic, and even your shipping will become more predictable. If you do want to niche down, so say that, what I mean by niching down is typically within reselling, it means picking a category and niching down to that category. So you would niche down to jeans, for instance, or you niche down to dresses. If you wanted to use these concepts and frameworks to pick a category to niche down to, you can actually time yourself, create cycle times per category. So say you have 20 jeans versus 20 dresses and you wanted to try to decide, which one to niche down to. You could time yourself in every single step of the reselling process, including sourcing, seeing how long the cycle time takes per category and how long the flow time takes per category. And then you can compare that to your average profitability per category. And you could decide to go with the one with the lowest flow time, the lowest cycle times, and the highest profit. I think this is, if you do want to niche down, something really important to do, especially when it comes to sourcing, because if you want to niche down to formal wear, for instance, but it takes you 20 minutes to source a single piece of formal wear, then that is definitely something that you have to take into consideration when you are establishing that niche. And similarly with my new business model, as my previous video illustrated, I'm spending a lot more time sourcing inventory. So it's something to keep in mind. Sourcing does have cycle times. If you spend an hour at a thrift store and only walk out with 2 items, that's an additional 30 minutes per item. That is significant. So there's always going to be a trade-off. And sometimes, depending on where you live, niching down too much just isn't an option for that reason. And similarly, like when we talked about assembly lines, the reason I've never really wanted to niche down to a single category is because it can become a lot more monotonous. You're processing a lot of the same inventory over and over and over again, which does maximize efficiency, like I said, but really your inventory just becomes widgets that you are processing over and over and over, and it really takes, for me, the fun out of it because it really reduces the variability. And having some variability, especially in the sourcing aspect of reselling, is to me what makes it enjoyable. So something to keep in mind. But with that being said, I hope this video was helpful to you. I'm really going to use a lot of what we talked about today to maximize my efficiency within my systems, because ultimately the reason I'm doing this is because I want to spend more time with my kids. And I think for a lot of us, we have things we want to do outside of reselling. So if we can make more money with less time spent, that's an ideal solution. But even if you want to spend all of your time reselling, if you can maximize efficiency, you'll make more money doing it. So I hope this video was helpful. Let me know in the comments down below if there are any other tips or tricks you use to maximize efficiency within your business. All right, thanks so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, love y'all. Bye.